Just a quick introduction. This is the complete Saga of Schopenbeard. It comes in 5 parts, so I hope you guys enjoy. Without further ado, here we go. Beards and philosophy. Greetings, tidings, and salutations, my fellow beard junkies. I decided to share my own encounter with a magnificent neckbeard, whom we shall call Schopen-Beard. Anyways, grab yourself a glass of dew and some Doritos, and on with the first entry of the Saga of Schopenbeard. First, let's introduce the cast. OP. That's me. I'm a bit shy, and apt to only speak when deemed appropriate. I'm 6'1", a little muscular, pale as a sheet, short brownish blonde hair, and dressed to differentiate myself with my pot-smoking, indigenous clothes-wearing colleagues, i.e. button-up shirt, dress jacket, and etc. At the time of this saga, I was a philosophy major in a university, with my passion for weird music, Mongolian throat singing, Turkish post-punk, bossa nova, you get the picture. I like video games, mostly RPGs, tabletop games like D&D and Star Wars, and of course, philosophy. My friend Mr. Wild, he's actually my best friend from the university. He's 6'1" as well, very skinny. He's got long black hair, and also of the pale, but more yellowish skin than me. He is also a philosophy major, with nerdy interest, though not video games or tabletop games. He has a curiosity in theology, and the occult, and literally dressed like Oscar Wilde. He is one of those Aspergers that are insanely smart, though lacking in social and emotional IQ. He gets straight A's with little to no effort. Then we got our neckbeard, Schopenbeard. He's 6'3", quite a tall fellow. He's also fat, but he's stocky due to the fact that he practiced Taekwondo. He's got brown skin, a black ponytail, dresses in anime stamped t-shirts, and a dress jacket. Thank God that later he bought a button shirt. He also wore cargo pants, and yes, an actual neckbeard. There was no fedora or trilby, sadly. But imagine the neckbeard from Powerpuff Girls, with brown skin and stockier, and that's him. His hygiene was okay, although he had the characteristic coffee and cigarette smell that most of us philosopher students had. He was also majoring in philosophy, but he entered a year after me. He had many obsessions, like One Piece, gross sexual commentaries, and jokes, probably hentai. He loved black humor, borderline hate humor, plus hating feminism and women entitlement, and Schopenhauer, hence his nickname. Now, if you know philosophy, you will know that his philosopher hero was even more of a misogynist than the master of edge, Nietzsche. Despite this, he was never rude with me or Mr. Wild, probably because we were male, and he saw us as his intellectual equals. Yes, he had a very high opinion of his intelligence. He had a superiority complex, although he indeed was smarter than average, and the classic atheistic euphoria. His awareness of social cues was, I kid you not, non-existent. He had boundary issues, personal space, and crushing handshakes. He loved inappropriate commentaries and jokes, and an inability to understand social situations. His laughter was like a strident shriek, a thunder from Zeus himself, that you could hear from across the university. Now with the cast presented, on with the first encounter with this beard. Beards and philosophy. Here we go. It was a cold morning in uni. As usual, I was early to most classes, since I lived very close to my university, even the 7 a.m. ones. Mr. Wild was also close. We would always stop by the local coffee shop, talking about the usual philosophy ramblings, our professors, our colleagues, and etc. We were there for a while. Then we headed to our classroom, Metaphysics 101. There we saw the beast. He was sitting hunched over, reading Love, Women, and Death. Yes, Schopenhauer, while plugged to his One Piece giant earbuds. He was parading his neckbeard and ponytail, proudly, dressed in an anime t-shirt with a jacket. He had on cargo pants and H&M casual shoes. At first, he didn't seem to notice us, so we proceeded to the classroom to keep on rambling. As we put our bags in the front row, We saw the ripples in the water bottles. Fearing the impending encounter, we turned around and we saw him waddling straight for us to the front row. He plopped his backpack down in the chair next to me. Mind you, the classroom was near empty, as usual for a morning class. He said while extending his hand for a shake,
"Wow. Hello. My name is Schopen-Beard. Nice to meet you."
He was nice and polite, so I proceeded to shake his hand. My hand suffered the crushing force of this great white shark bite. Holding my ground and trying to ignore it, I say,
Hey, my name's OP. Nice to meet you. Are you new in philosophy?
He answered with a chuckle,
Yes, well, I've read most philosophers, and I've written very good essays, so I'm here.
At this moment, Mr. Wilde was sitting next to me, not knowing what to do in true Aspie fashion, so I introduced him to the beard.
This is Mr. Wilde.
With an awkward smile, he raised his hand in greeting to the beard. He is germophobic. Hi, nice to meet you. And with a straight face, he continued,
Is this your girlfriend, OP?
Mr. Wilde and I are straight, and I'm still crushing on a girl from school. We were silent, and the beard unleashed his laughter to the sky as if he was trying to reach Mount Olympus.
I'm just kidding, OP. It's the hair and the starving African physique.
I answered with a brief fake chuckle while hiding my cringe face. Thank God the teacher arrived and class began. Luckily, the class was uneventful. After it, he beelined to the teacher and began asking him questions and praising him profusely, sucking up at its best. We took the chance to get away from him, and we went back to the coffee shop. We stayed for at least 10 minutes, and then we went to our next class. As we approached the building, we heard the unmistakable voice of Schopenbeard, and Mr. Wilde said, OP, let's run, now. I stopped since I didn't like to be rude and ignore people. Mr. Wilde dropped his cigarette, and he went straight into the building.
Hey, OP, wait up. Are you going to History of Modern Philosophy?
After taking a puff of my cigarette, I answer,
Yes, Schopenbeard. I'm just gonna finish my cigarette before class.
That's good. I was planning on smoking one myself while I contemplate the sexy female cattle. The best so far have been cattle from med school.
I cringed on the inside, but I kept a poker face, and I said,
Oh, okay, I guess.
He proceeded,
Yes, they might be dumb, but I wouldn't mind dunking and... See that one with the blonde hair? Super suckalicious.
Literal translation from the word that he used in our native language. Too much cringe for me, so I just said,
Oh, look at the time. I'm gonna be late. See ya.
See, OP.
and proceeded to ignite a cigarette and kept on creeping. After that cringy and revolting interaction, I went to my class. As I always do, I sat in the front row, where Mr. Wilde was seated, reading poems from the damned poets, like Baudelaire. And surprise, surprise, Schopenbeard once again waddled up to us, plopped his backpack on the seat next to mine.
Oh, are you in this class too, Schopenbeard?
Indeed, OP. Though I do gotta say, the cattle here is very ugly, very disappointing.
Saved again by my teacher, who arrived immediately before his lecture, which was uneventful. After the class, Mr. Wilde and I bolted, while Schopenbeard sucked up to the other teacher, as usual. Although most philosophy students like doing so, Mr. Wilde and I quickly left university, and we proceeded to go back to our homes. That was our first encounter with Schopenbeard. Many of them are filled with disgusting and demeaning comments to women. I'm no feminist, much less third-wave feminism, but his openly misogynistic commentaries were very unpleasant, to say the least. Now it's time to introduce the new cast members in our encounter with the beard. Miss LaCane, another best friend from uni. She's female, 5'6", skinny, long black hair, dressed in casual clothes. She's also a philosophy major, with an almost unhealthy obsession with psychoanalysis, especially Lacanian, hence the name, but she's an overall cool person. She's a serial smoker with a low tolerance towards Schopen-Beard. Mr. Logic, another one of my friends from uni, 6'1", muscular, brown skin, short military-style black hair, dressed in the epitome of casual clothing. Also a philosophy major. Logic personified. Although he does have a good sense of humor and a melancholic personality. With the new cast introduced, on with the story. After my first encounter with Schopenbeard, the next week, I met with my best friends. We met at our usual coffee shop. Mr. Wild, Mr. Logic, Miss LaCane, and me. As Mr. Wild and I were sharing our first cringy encounter, we felt like someone was watching us from afar. And indeed, our coffee started to ripple, and we knew the beard was approaching. Brace for the impending cringe. I took a big gulp of coffee. Mr. Wild whispered, "Oh great, it's this fatso again." Then the beard said louder than he needed,
Hello, OP and Mr. Wild. I see you're still pulling the African kid look. Only thing missing are the stomach worms.
We were dumbfounded at the atrocious comment. After a few awkward seconds, he unleashed his shriek of a laughter that would put Zeus's thunder strikes to shame. To describe it more in depth, do you know those animes like the Shumatsu no Valkyrie, Record of Ragnarok, where the characters have names for their special attacks? Well, Schopenbeard's laughter was one of those, which I baptized as Senda Shraiku, Thundero Shriek, which is in English. First, he fills his lungs with as much air as he can, while beginning to cock his head backwards and gaze toward the heavens. After his head is in position, and his neckbeard, which now points forward, he begins to protrude as the shriek is loaded. Then he opens his mouth and unleashes a sound that even a deaf person can hear, while staring at the heavens and laugh at God himself, and producing a radius akin to a grenade explosion.
Just be careful of this Catholic establishment with the helpless kid look.
The dreaded Senda Shraiku was unleashed again to wreak its havoc on our poor eardrums. After the shock waves had dissipated, we proceeded to laugh awkwardly, except for Mr. Logic, who just chuckled. Up to this day, I don't know if he was chuckling with or at Schopenbeard. I tried to break the tension and I said,
Oh, hello, Schopenbeard. It's you.
My fellow victims of the Senda Shraiku were silent. Mr. Wild was passively aggressively smiling, while Miss LaCane had a surprised look, and Mr. Logic had his best poker face that I've seen to this day. The beard replied,
Well, OP, aren't you going to introduce me?
What the actual... Still, I figured it would be rude not to, so I said,
Everyone, Schopenbeard. Schopenbeard? Everyone.
Unimpressed, Schopenbeard uttered,
Now, OP, that's no way to introduce a friend, is it? I'm Schopenbeard, first semester philosophy major, and who is this woman?
Mr. Logic was still silent, as well as Mr. Wild. Miss LaCane, still under the effects of shell shock, tried to be nice and said,
Hey, I'm Miss LaCane. Oh, so you must know Miss X.
Miss X is a friend of Miss LaCane, also on her first semester of philosophy. Puzzled, Schopenbeard proceeded to scratch his trimmed, to his credit, neckbeard, and said in a very greasy tone,
I don't know. Is she hot? If she's not, I won't remember her. I only remember the hot ones.
What the... again? Miss LaCane was shocked. Her face was a pure expression of astonishment at the amount of cringe. And you guessed it. Wait, no Sendashi Shiraiku? This avatar of a neckbeard archetype was being serious. She was silent for a moment, and then with a fake smile, she said,
I really gotta go now, or I'll be late to class again.
To her credit, she did arrive late to most classes, granted that she lived very far away, like 2 hours away from university.
See y'all.
And with that, she left. Schopenbeard said to her, in a normal tone, for once.
See you, Miss Lacken.
Then after a few seconds, he muttered,
She's hot. I'll remember her.
Ugh, cringe again. Mr. Logic said quick, Bah, and simply left, leaving Mr. Wilde and me all alone with this cringe machine. This Mr. Wilde couldn't bear so much excitement himself. He said he was going to buy some coffee or something, but he just left the scene too. I stood alone, fearing another Thunduru strike, and I said in a rushed tone,
Well, nice seeing you, but I've got to study.
I didn't really have to, but I went ahead and headed to the library. You can't really speak in there, as not to disturb. With an excited tone, he said,
Wow, me too, OP.
Oh, shit, I thought. Well, at least you won't be able to speak, right? Wrong. With fake kindness, I said.
Oh, cool.
We proceeded to the library, and the whole walk there he talked my ear off about how great Schopenhauer is, and how God is not real, and how females are entitled, etc. After a gruesome monologue, we arrived to the library. I proceeded to fake study on the table. I decided to read my copy of the writings of Baron Saint Germain, while Schopen sat next to me with his Bibles of Love, Women, and Death by Schopenhauer. Everything was nice and quiet until a med female student passed us. She was, I kid you not, a 10 out of 10. Still, I didn't pay much attention. I had a crush on a girl, but Schopenbeard laser focused on her with a lustful face, of course, ogling indiscreetly over her attributes. Luckily for her, she didn't notice, as she was looking at her phone with earbuds on, sheltering her from the lustful gaze of the bearded one. This was another one of his signature moves, the Yoshi Faku, otherwise known as the gaze. Then after licking his lips, he whispered something to me, something that still makes me cringe today.
I wouldn't mind sinking it in here. That's gotta be the most delicious cattle I've ever seen. Too bad she must be dumb because, of course, beauty is inversely proportional to intelligence in cattle.
Not believing what he considered appropriate to share with me, he proceeded.
She would look even hotter while being f***ed in all her holes by tentacles, like in those hentai videos.
I detached from my body as cringe filled every cell of my being. Then he began cocking his head backwards. Oh god. And he released his signature move, the Sendeshi Shiraiku. The ripples made everyone stare at us, including the victim of Schopenbeard's Yoshi Faku. I began to panic, since the bookkeepers in the library were the kind of people that would outright ban you from the library from being noisy. Of course, we were ejected from the library with a warning and a reprimand with a long speech. After being temporarily exiled from the library, Schopenbeard grunted,
What up, bitch? Typical female entitlement.
Oh, please stop it. Annoyed, I said.
What the Schopenbeard? Don't you see that's a library?
Surprised, he answered.
Yeah, but it was just a little FOP. What a stuck-up old hag.
With a sigh, I stopped responding, and I checked the time on my phone. Oh, I was going to be late for class, so I bolted.
Hey, OP, wait!
He began to follow me. To his credit, he wasn't exhausted after the run, and he followed me into the classroom. A second more and I would have been late, thus injuring my grade. I sat in the front row, as usual, and indeed, Schopenbeard plopped his rotund behind on the seat next to me. The class, thank God, was uneventful. Mr. Wilde and Miss Lacane were already there. Now you're seeing why this part is called the Bearded Shadow, because he followed me around like a shadow, all the way up till 5 p.m. I know, I should have said something to him, and that I didn't want him around, but 5 years ago, I was very shy and I couldn't stand up for myself. I can do it now, and I'm not as shy, thanks to my bro-based Zeus, but I digress. Back to the story. After class, I met with my friends, and we began our processions to our respective homes. And you guessed it, Schopenbeard followed close, After saying our goodbyes, Mr. Wilde walked home. Miss Lacane took the bus home, and I took another, which to my sorrow coincided with Schopenbeard's. Luckily for me, it was just a 20-minute ride. Still, those were 20 minutes of Schopenbeard's usual monologues until the sweet release of home. He had to ride for another 30 minutes, so after I got down from the bus, he plugged himself into the gigantic one-piece earbuds and rode away, while I breathed a sigh of relief as I walked home. Since the next encounter was short, but cringy, I'll break down some insight into Schopenbeard's psyche and his background before the next part. So grab yourself a glass of the Dew of the Mountain, some Doritos, and let's delve into the mind of Schopenbeard. Mind you, I'm not a therapist of any kind. This is like a retrospective impression of his character, you know, in the name of neckbeard research. In a few words, why I think his neckbeardiness was not his essential attribute, albeit very entrenched, but it was just his shell to defend himself from the world, and a plea for attention. He was, in my humble opinion, a broken man, hiding behind his neckbeard archetype. You remember the scene from Shrek about onions, where onions and ogres are alike? Well, my thesis is that most neckbeards are like those ogres. Shrek mentioned that those smelly, layered, and greasy onions were much like him. But with the neckbeard, it's got creepiness, misogyny, bravado, and entitlement were just layers, hiding deeply insecure, traumatized, and lost human beings. That explains Schopenbeard's behavior. He was born in a middle-class household, as an only child. He lived with only his mother. I don't know what happened to his father, but apparently he wasn't much into the picture for some reason. I learned that he was also bullied in school, since he was a dork, and he was rejected by females. So I think he covered himself with a layer of misogyny and cynicism to cope, which only thickened as he read about Schopenhauer. As such, he didn't have very many friends, which probably impaired his social understanding of situations. Worse, he might have befriended kids like him, further increasing the bearded archetype, kind of like the echo chamber effect. Indeed, if you're only exposed to the same opinions that you have and are constantly validated, you just entrench more in them. I don't know for certain how his relationship with his mother was, but I can make a guess, assuming they identified with Schopenhauer. You see, Schopenhauer hated his mother because she always considered him a disappointment, and she often criticized him on his behavior and personality. His father came from a family that may have some mental issues, but Schopenhauer thought that his mother's nagging was a detonator for his apparent accidental death and his troublesome, cynical personality. I got another hypothesis. Maybe his relationship with his mother, on the contrary, was very close, almost too close. And so, not being validated in the same way by the objects of his desire, to which he probably felt entitled, planted the seed of his misogyny, which grew into a noxious, poisonous, neckbeard-clad flower of demeaning comments for females. Add to the sexual frustration of a hormonal teenager, and you have the recipe for a neckbeardy nice guy. Lack of attention from his peers were probably the seed for a superiority complex, raising himself above the inferior human species and cattle, only increased by his entertainment consumption. Despite this, he probably craved any attention, even if it was negative, like some villains in stories tend to do. Hence his comments and the lack of understanding on how to behave in social situations. That's about as much as I can delve into his mind. This newly shed light on his being, I hope, make you, as it did to me, more sympathetic with not only Schopenbeard, but with other neckbeards too, except for Wheezybeard. I don't want to talk about Wheezybeard. Now that that's out of the way, let's get to our next encounter. Schopenbeard Part 3, The Bearded Cockblocker. For our next encounter, I need to do some more introductions. For instance, Miss Joplin. She's female, 5'9", very skinny, not voluptuous, and a visual arts student. She's got blonde long hair, green eyes, pale skin, a bit sunburnt, and a lot, I mean lots, of tattoos. She models on the side. She's got a very alternative, artsy aesthetic, and her clothes and big glasses are like the one that Janis Joplin used, hence the name. She was a chain smoker of sweet tobacco and marijuana. You get the picture. Now with the new cast introduced, on with the story. The same semester that Schopenbeard introduced himself to me, I began a double major. I decided to immerse myself in history, along with the philosophy one. I had to go through many first semester history classes, hence why a month or two goes by from part 1 and part 2, in which I don't remember any major sweet delicious cringe, except for the very bad timed Sandashi Shiraikus in class, and some very racist and or misogynistic jokes. Sometimes they mixed together, so they were doubly offensive to the SJWs. Side note, this semester also had a legbeard, who was obsessed with me. She deserves a whole saga on her own, filled with manipulation, sexual harassment, psychological harassment of my ex-girlfriend, and much more. In my first history class, I met Miss Joplin. I was drawn to her like I was to Reddit's narration of the Beard saga. That alternative grungy look was at the time a huge turn-on for me, and my edgelord past self, my rebellious, smells like teen spirit, is now replaced by an old man's knees that cracks every time he crouches. I was enthralled with Miss Joplin, like a moth to the flame. Plus, I was dealing with the nuclear annihilation from my crush, which I mentioned in the past. In short, I called her many times, and I asked her out until she finally rejected me. I was taking that splinter out, if you will, since I asked her out in school for her to say yes, and then never speak to me again. I still don't know why to this day. Probably something to do about her parents, the Jewish community, and my non-Jewishness. I don't know. Anyways, I digress. Back to Miss Joplin. During the time until this encounter, Miss Joplin and I flirted a lot, and things began to shape up nicely. But slowly, we would sit together, we would go out, and etc. One of those days I invited her to an official date, so I took her to the coffee shop. That's where our bearded boy comes into play. We met at the said coffee shop. I ordered a big black coffee for me and aromatic water for her, which was basically a tea made of herbs and fruit instead of tea leaves. We sat down and we began to talk very closely. We began flirting and laughing and all that jazz. It was shaping up to be a good date. To the outside, we were clearly on a date, but then the ripples in my still coffee began to form, and I began to pray that he would not interrupt. Oh, but I was not so fortunate. He did interrupt, unfortunately.
Hey, OP, how's it going?
He just plopped his behind next to Miss Joplin and me. I'm shocked. Miss Joplin was beginning to grin awkwardly as he looked at her and basically ignored her, or refused to acknowledge her presence at all.
Hi. A little busy at the moment.
I was hinting in my tone that this was not a good time, especially if he was going to demonstrate his power attacks, or just say his usual cringy comments. He lit a cigarette and he addressed me.
Hey, did you hear that?
Blah, blah, blah.
Like a hungry black kid.
Insert his signature laugh. Blah, blah, blah.
You know, feminism and cancer, and this feminazi said...
Blah, blah, blah. Insert another one of his signature laughs. I have no words at this moment. He was just engaged in this prodigious monologue, of which I can only recall bits and pieces of, since my thoughts were bent on how to shut him up without being rude. I didn't come up with an idea. I just stood there annoyed, with my face contorted into a shocked, annoyed expression. Miss Joplin was now grinning like the Daddy E-Girl Wojak meme. The moment was officially ruined. After the air in his lungs were properly expelled, and he began to reload for another assault, Miss Joplin and I exchanged an awkward glance, and she gets up and awkwardly says,
Well, thanks for the drink, OP. See ya.
Well, there goes the momentum.
Of course. You're very welcome. See you.
She went with the wind, while I was left alone with this bearded friend. To no one's surprise, Schopen-Beard didn't say anything to her, or acknowledge her in any way, and with his prodigious, yet terrifying lungs recharged, he unleashed another long monologue, in which I just endured, until he was depleted again. And with a quick goodbye, I left the table. That way I could process what just happened. His last words to me were,
See you around, OP.
Like nothing happened. At that moment, I truly grasped his lack of social awareness and social cues. By this point, I've known Schopenbeard for about 4 months, in which I had, apart from the past entries, some minor cringy encounters like his usual demeaning comments to women, or as he puts it, cattle, his attempts at black humor, or that X is retarded, or things like that. This encounter happened the following semester, where more of my high school friends entered university. Naturally, I wanted to introduce them to my uni friends, Mr. Wild, Mr. Logic, and Miss LeCane, but that didn't work. Except for Miss LeCane and Beard, my beard light friend, that went to the same high school. Unfortunately, that also meant that the bearded shadow, Schopenbeard, who for some unknown reason decided to double major in theology. Maybe he wanted to debunk them from the inside with his euphoria. Anyways, since he tended to stick to people, I met many theology majors that were also shadowed by Schopenbeard. Although, the only one that I kind of befriended was a former junkie who found God and wanted to be a Lutheran pastor. I began to ramble on about my past D&D campaigns around him, and he decided to try and play it. So I offered my humble services as a GM. He gladly accepted. But he was also kind of close to Schopenbeard, who also wanted to play too. So I allowed him for the campaign too. To fill the remaining spots, I invited two of my high school friends, Mr. Sorcerer, my cousin, and absolute best friend, and Beard. Now we managed to go for 2 sessions before it all blew up. With that said, I'll introduce the new cast. Beard. He's one of my best friends. He's 5'8", chubby, long curly black hair, splotches of hair on his face, and he dresses in all black, like a metalhead or goth style. He looks like a neckbeard, but he's actually nice and self-aware, just enough to avoid behaving like a complete neckbeard. He changed the bearded entitlement for nihilism, and fascination with the occult, and general edginess. He's obsessed with cinema, or Kino, as you call it, Black Sabbath, and all things metal. The Sorcerer, he's my cousin, and my best friend to this day. He's 6'1", average weight, long Jesus-style brown hair and a beard. He wears nerdy shirts and pants. He's an all-around nerd. He's a master of nerddom, and he GMs, hence his nickname. He's a literature major, absolute bro, very kind and compassionate. He's a smoker of the devil's lettuce, and an aspiring fantasy and cosmic horror writer. Mr. Luther. He's an ex-junkie turned man of God. He's majoring in theology so he can be a pastor. He's 6'3", skinny, has Jesus-style brown hair, but is clean-shaven. He wears normal basic t-shirts, a jacket, pants, and shoes. He's a good enough guy, although sometimes kind of beardy. He liked black humor, and he's a hater of SJWs, just like his friend Schopenbeard, but with a more tolerable measure, since he didn't top it off with misogyny or constantly harassed people with unwanted monologues. With the cast introduced, I shall proceed to give unto thee some tabletop neckbeard cringe, horror at the tabletop. As I said, at this point, our beard had started his double major in theology and philosophy. In his first semester, he met Mr. Luther, and he introduced him to me. One day I was talking with Beard and the Sorcerer about a past D&D campaign, where we basically became a band of edgy murder hobos that destroyed the political stability of the world that the Sorcerer prepared for us, since the party leader was a schizoid neutral evil, warlock, which was made by me. I know, but at the time of the campaign, I was an edgelord and a borderline neckbeard. Schopenbeard and Mr. Luther overheard our conversation, and they both began asking questions about D&D, which we happily answered. After about an hour of nerding out, I had a great idea of running a campaign. We do this in our free time at university. Surely that'll end well, right? Wrong. Oh, I was so wrong. The campaign lasted exactly 2 sessions. First, a list of the endgame characters. Beard played his classic, homeless, dirty, antisocial ranger. The Sorcerer played the standard, classic knight in shining armor. Mr. Luther played an unforgiving cleric with a hatred for the undead. Most of the interactions will be in character, unless otherwise stated. Schopenbeard played a half-orc wizard that ended up being that guy. You know, The one who tries to screw everything that moves, even if it means derailing the quest and creating problems for the party, for no other reason than roleplay. The first session wasn't so bad, although half of it is about getting the party together. The second half was a generic hunt for a necromancer that would lead to a necromantic takeover of the realm. We settled into a study room at the university library, and we began the adventure. It all started, as any good campaign does, with the good old tavern and inn, where they were summoned by a mysterious figure that promised great riches for adventurers. The first one to arrive was Beard and the sorcerer. After a brief discussion and interaction, they sat at the table, waiting for the mysterious figure. After some time, Mr. Luther arrived. He was sent by his parish to investigate the necromantic activity. He showed the summoning letter to the bartender, who pointed him to the table where Beard and the sorcerer were sitting. He approached and introduced himself, then he sat down. Finally, Schopen-Beard arrived, and he went straight for the barmaid that were serving drinks, and he said,
Well, what do we have here? You're a godsend of a wench. Fetch me those jugs, will you?
Well, he was pointing at the jugs of beer, suspiciously close to her chest. And he performed his famous Sandashi Shuraiku. That should have been a warning of the upcoming train crash, but I thought...
It's his first time. That's a pretty usual thing that happens.
So I ignore it. The barmaid, of course, rejected his advances and inquired about what he wanted.
Nothing. Just a little, while looking at his crotch.
Luckily, the sorcerer went to the rescue.
Oh, hello. You must also be an adventurer. Come here.
And he gestured his hand. Schopenbeard, to my surprise, answered the call, but left this gem.
I'll be back, wench. See you soon.
He licked his lips before letting out his signature laugh. When they were all seated at the table, introductions were in order. After Schopenbeard introduced himself as an Epicurean wizard, basically a nihilist, hedonistic based in a bad reading of Epicureanism, the mysterious figure arrived. They saw a tall man in a black cloak approaching.
Greetings, adventurers. Thank you for answering my summons. I trust that you had no issues finding the tavern.
After a couple of seconds, he continued.
The necromancer that I need disappeared. Is in a cave 2 days east from here. Look for a blue tree and you shall find him.
And with that, he up and left the tavern. It was late, so they rented rooms and they rested for the night. Except for Schopenbeard. He wanted to bang the wench, so he approached the counter and he said,
Wench, remember me? We have unfinished business.
And the waitress said,
Sorry, do you need anything else? I'm closing in for the night.
Undeterred, our bearded friend replied,
My chambers now. I won't say it again.
This was kind of in character, so I allowed the interaction to continue. Besides, the rest of the party was watching attentively, so I continued the roleplay.
No, sorry, I'm married, but there is a brothel a few blocks from here.
He gleefully exclaimed out of character.
OP, I go to the brothel and spend the night there.
So I concede, and I sent him on his way. The morning came, and with the party formed up, I embarked on the adventure to the necromancer's lair. They marched for a day and a half, until they reached a tree with green and blue leaves. It was spotted by Beard, and indeed, there was a cave nearby. They set up camp for the night. They rested, and entered the cave at the break of dawn. The cave was dark and damp. Lucky for our intrepid adventurers, Mr. Luther cast light on his mace, so they basically had a lantern. They saw some bones laying around on the inside, and they arrived at a stone door at the end of the cave. If you thought dungeon, you thought right. The sorcerer was scratching his beard. And he said,
That looks like a dungeon. How are we going to pass this door?
Then Schopenbeard said,
Fingers crossed for a sex dungeon.
We all cringed, and we ignored his comment. Beard replied with a coarse voice,
Smells like evil to me.
Then Mr. Luther exclaimed,
Fear not. I say to the evil lock, I shall break it with the fury of the sun.
Then he cast Detect Evil, and he detected undead presences, but no evil blocking the door. So the sorcerer, being a veteran, said to Schopenbeard to try to detect magic. Schopenbeard gleefully said out of character,
I cast it, OP.
Then I replied,
All right. Roll for it.
He did, and it passed the check.
You detect a blocking spell at the door. What do?
I break the spell.
Good thinking. Okay, you must dispel magic.
He rolls a very good roll, so he broke the spell. After they entered the dungeon, it was very straightforward. A corridor with a door at the end. Schopenbeard all willy-nilly entered, but the sorcerer pulled him back by his tunic.
There may be traps ahead. Ozzy, do your thing.
Ozzy began smelling for traps, and indeed, he found a couple of wire-triggered guillotines. He disarmed them with just an average roll, then they reached the final door. The sorcerer, in knightly fashion, destroyed it. They saw a cowed figure who said,
"So, I see someone found me. Well, never mind you. You will be undead before you know it."
He raised his hand, and they were surrounded by 7 zombies. The sorcerer engaged 2, while Ozzybeard engaged 1, and Mr. Luther 2 more, leaving 2 to Schopenbeard, who instead of casting, trashed them with a dagger. I know, half-orc, and luck was on his side. After disposing the undead, the necromancer said,
"I need further preparation for this."
But before he could escape, Mr. Luther bolted, rolling a nat 20, and destroyed his skull with a holy mace. After the heroic but rushed action, they were like the fishes in the plastic bag on the Nemo movie, asking themselves, "What now?" And Ozzybeard said,
"Time for looting."
We found a note, summoning him to a big necromancer reunion that was about a week travel south. At this point, we'd already played for like 4 hours, so I ended the session satisfied, although a bit scarred from a bit of cringe. We got up and we said our goodbyes and we left. Although the next session, my patience ended, so did the campaign, thanks to Schopenbeard. After that, we booked our calendars for the second session. And so, a week or so later, we gathered in the study room in the theology facility, courtesy of Mr. Luther, and we sat for the adventure. Little did we know of the brewing storm, and how I abandoned my happy and easygoing DMing to become a punishing god. After finding the note, the party discussed the next course of action. The sorcerer took the stage and proclaimed,
It's high time we chase this band of necromancers of the world and, as a bonus, get well paid.
Mr. Luther replied,
High time indeed! They shall be smitten by the true unforgiving light of God!
Then Ozzybeard said,
Don't know. Something smells fishy. Like that smelly smell that smells. We should head back to the cantina and find our employer. Besides, the trip needs extra funding or a raise.
Schopenbeard, with a serious tone, said,
Agreed. Besides, there's still a winch to pump.
We all went silent, and after a few seconds, the sorcerer uttered,
'Tis best to keep moving. The sooner we stop the menace, the better.
After a few minutes of deliberation, the party decided to follow the trail and to stop the necromantic threat. Schopenbeard reluctantly agreed, and they exited the cave to head south. But never fear, our intrepid neckbeard still had some cringe up his sleeve. After 2 days on the road, they arrived at a small town so that they could resupply and hopefully get a good night's rest. Of course, they went straight to the tavern, which unfortunately for Schopenbeard had no winches, only a barman. They entered it, and it was very empty, save a couple of tables where there were sad and tired farmers that sat drinking in silence. Schopenbeard, as he entered, broke the ice.
Bring me a flagon of beer and your best winches.
The barman, unimpressed, said with a somber tone,
Afraid you aren't gonna find any women in this town. They all just mysteriously disappeared.
The sorcerer said with a gasp.
Could this be related to black magic?
The barman replied, maintaining a somber tone.
I don't know. All's very messy. The only thing I know for sure was the gallops we heard the night it happened.
Ozzybeard said in a rugged tone.
Sounds like raiders to me.
Mr. Luther casted a detect evil or good. Good roll, but he didn't sense any hand of evil. He said to the party,
Probably. No evil of necromantic kind could be sensed around.
Schopenbeard with a grin said,
Surely there's a female left in town.
I obliged him, but I did what I felt would be best to avoid any complications, and maybe block his lust and have a pleasant game. So the barman replied,
Only the little girls are left. They were at least spared their innocence.
I see. Interesting.
Then with the glee of a child that was opening a present at Christmas, he shouted,
Lolly feast!
The sorcerer and I cringed. Ozzybeard laughed, as well as Mr. Luther, And with that, you guessed it, he engaged in the dreaded Sendashi Shiraiku. Our eardrums were shattered, the windows cracked, and a bunch of theological facility members just stared at us. Our time had come. A high-ranking facility member threatened to evict us from the premises. Luckily for us, Mr. Luther and I immediately apologized and vowed not to disturb again. That was very close. I reprimanded Schopenbeard.
Please try to avoid doing that, or else the game will be ruined.
He answered without a shred of guilt, sorrow, or shame.
Yeah, just spare me a PMSing.
I popped a little vein in my forehead. He was starting to get on my nerves. One more beardy action from him, and he will meet the spite and the punishment of the vengeful DM. Containing my anger, I said,
Let's try to continue, but please everyone, let's try to be less noisy.
and we continued. The barman was shocked and terrified and reached for something under the counter, and he said, "What'd you say? My daughter is of them." The sorcerer, as the kind soul that he was, jumped in, and he profusely apologized for the companion's comment. After some convincing speech rolls and a few coins for the inconvenience, they agreed to give us lodging for the night, except for Schopenbeard, who had to sleep in the barn. Before going to rest, the sorcerer, as he is the knight, inquired the party.
Should we help this village, or do we keep going, my friends?
Coarsely, Ozzybeard said.
You think they'll pay us?
Mr. Luther replied,
Pay or no pay, necromancers and undead must be slain. Let's move on.
Schopenbeard added,
Yeah, won't give us anything. Not damsels, wenches, or pay. This village is a hole. We should move on.
The sorcerer left and asked about pay, and there was none to be had, except for lodging and food, as long as they protected the village and hunted for the kidnappers. He communicated that to the party, and they decided to move on. After that, they were tired of to sleep. In the morning, they had breakfast and they left the village, and they kept on their pursuit south. They reached a small outpost, so that they could rest for the night. The outpost had a small population of 50 people, mostly farmers and a couple of town's guards. As they arrived, they saw many of them dressed in rags, sick and wounded. Mr. Luther began to heal those that accepted God as their savior and pledged themselves to his might. Ozzybeard and the sorcerer armed the camp and spoke with the town guards, who explained that the same mysterious attack of horsemen and a plague had befallen, and that they housed many refugees. They gave them some coins and they sat by the fireplace. Schopenbeard, you guessed it, asked.
Are the women in the outpost hot?
Innocently, I replied,
Yes, some are, although most are in rags, dirty, wounded, or sick.
and he answered out of character.
I roll to search the hottest one.
Annoyed, I replied as a GM.
Fine, roll.
He rolled a 21. Respecting the will of the dice, I say,
You see a very beautiful figure tending to the wounded. She is dressed as a nun, with porcelain skin, blue eyes, and full lips.
he proclaimed triumphantly.
I approach the fair lady and place my hand on her low back.
I swallowed some saliva, dreading the impending cringe, and I said,
Roll for grapple.
He rolled a 17. Not bad, more than enough to place his hand on her back. I continue.
As she feels your hand on her back, she jumps forward, screams, and drops hot tea on a gashing wound.
What's wrong with you? Go away! Don't you see I'm a woman of God?
He continued his advances.
Come on, woman. I can make you feel like a true female. A bit sinful Esther's never hurt anyone.
Then he got closer to her. This was getting weird, so I decided to abort the cringe bomb by rolling a kick in the nuts. Natural 14. Yes, very low roll, but enough to make Schopenbeard's character flinch, and the nun escaped. He abruptly said to me,
Hey, what the hell, OP? Don't you see she was into me?
You cock-blocked me, I cock-block you. Sweet revenge. I reply as GM.
What did you expect?
I chase after her.
I was growing increasingly annoyed, so I say in the best stern voice.
No, you cannot.
He got angry.
What the hell? Why not?
Trying to avoid a shouting match, I said,
Fine, roll for athletics.
Damn it, you half-orc wizard. He rolled a 19. This is not over, I thought to myself. Then I said,
You are able to chase her, but reach the metal door of a small convent. It looks warded by holy magic.
He questioned me profusely.
Are there windows?
I replied, trolling him at this point.
Yes, but very high.
He scoffed, and with a smug look, he said,
I roll athletics to climb.
Go ahead. You have to pass a skill check of 25. Hurry up, because the guards are coming for you after that scandal.
He rolled a 25, so I said,
You climb, but before reaching the window, hot oil is poured on you for 1d4 damage. Time for a saving throw to see if you fall.
He rolled a 5. In a half-smug, cocky tone, I said,
You fall while trying to scratch the walls and fall for 1d6 damage.
He said angrily,
What?
That's not all. You get arrested for disturbing the peace and get the party thrown out of the outpost.
They all said to me,
Oh, come on.
Aw, come on.
Sad for the rest of the party, I said.
You can still make camp on the outskirts.
They did, and after the awkward silence, they all retired to their respective tents. Oh, but Schopenbeard had one more beardy trick. He said,
I sneak into the outpost.
You haven't done enough? I thought to myself, but decided to indulge him. He would be punished for derailing the campaign, and maybe even put him in his place. I said,
Please do roll for sneak.
He rolled a 14. Not bad, but not great. So I said to him,
You barely made it unnoticed. What do you do?
with smugness he said,
I murder the guards who casted us out.
and with a poker face I said,
Very well. As you approach the unsuspecting guards in their tent, you hear various heavy gallops encircling the outpost. After a short while, the screaming began, and as you looked at your surroundings, you feel a bag over your head, and some unseen horror kidnaps you.
He gets angry again, and he says,
No, you can't do that, OP. Why are you being such a
Before continuing, I gotta make a trigger warning for sexual assault. You have been warned twice now. I said,
Oh, it gets better. As the bag is lifted from your head, you see yourself strapped to a tree, naked, and in a small, shall we say, canine position. Then you see the mysterious figures, a whole party of 20 centaurs. Each of them gets some special time with you and leave you there.
He hid his anger and laughed, trying to hide his feelings. We were silent. The story moved on. The party later found him starved on the same tree. They untied him and kept on going south. At this point, they were all tired, so I ended the session. After some short goodbyes, we each went our separate ways. That was the last session of the campaign, in part thanks to Schopenbeard's antics and life in general. After this encounter, my exposure to Schopenbeard gradually diminished, since he met a group of neckbeard theologians just like him. So, he started to stick to them and not to me, thank God. Still, I had one more noteworthy encounter that intersects my story of my very own legbeard stalker. Until next time, the final part of the Schopenbeard saga, the Epilogue. This final part contains my last noteworthy encounter with Schopenbeard before he drifted completely to his new neckbeard coven. This story also intersects with my legbeard stalker, so with that said, let's proceed with the last encounter. New to the cast is Betty Beard. She's my very own legbeard stalker and sexual harasser. She's 5'6", plump and fat, greasy black long hair, dork glasses, braces, and acne. She's not particularly smelly. She's dressed in jean overalls, a t-shirt, and Converse-style shoes. She was socially awkward, but manipulative, and a scheming weasel. Just imagine a short, fat, plump, and uglier version of Ugly Betty. Now with the cast introduced, with our Dews of the Mountain and the Doritos at ready, on with the story. This story begins at my university, as with most of this saga, specifically at the famous coffee shop that I mentioned in my previous entries. Ozzybeard and I were discussing acid and where to buy it. I know, drugs in university, right? Definitely not cliche. We agreed that the best and safest place would be Port Andrew. That was our code name for a mall where we got many of our contrabands, knockoffs, and etc. that was sold in our country. So we decided to go on Friday, right after our classes. Well, Friday came. The car was ready, and Ozzy Beard and I were discussing what to do afterwards. We were going to go to his house and play some regular D&D campaigns, the one where I played my edgier than Cold Steel the Hedgehog, with our friends the Sorcerer, Abraham Lincoln, which was a neckbeard-clad friend of ours. Then we had Bob. He was an artist and a bit of a pothead. They're not really much in the story, so that's all I'm going to mention about them. As we were in preparations, Betty Beard, who was somewhat of a friend to Ozzy Beard, overheard our conversation, and she said,
"Please, OP, let me go too. I want to see what the fuss is all about."
I felt something in her tone, like a secret intention and motivation. I chose to ignore it, since our ultimate destiny was Ozzy Beard's house. That was a fatal mistake, which ended in me being sexually harassed that night. Although, that's a story for another time. Ozzy Beard said calmly,
Yeah, I don't see a problem.
I do not like this, I thought to myself, but whatever. So I sternly replied.
Sure, whatever.
Betty Beard was ecstatic, and she cheerfully said,
"Yeah, thanks. I got to pass by my house for some clothes, though."
Shocked, I said.
Oh, why?
She replied with a smug tone,
"Well, of course, silly. To spend the night there? It will be too late for public transport to where I'm staying."
I really had a bad feeling about this. Granted, she did live very far from university and from Ozzy Beard's place, but very close to Port Andrews. Plus, most of us, after our long campaigns, spent the night at Ozzy Beard's abode anyway, so I ignored my gut feeling and again I said,
Fine, where do you live?
Keeping her smugness, she said,
"Very close to Port Andrews. I'll show you."
It's close, so whatever. Then I hear him approaching. The mighty Schopen-Beard. He had heard our interaction too, and he wanted to come along for the ride.
Hey, OP, hope you aren't leaving behind for the ride, right?
Why would I, right? Thanks to my lack of a spine and his kind of friendship with Ozzy Beard, I conceded to this mighty Beard's claims. Lucky me! Stuck in a car in heavy traffic with a leg beard and a neck beard. What could go wrong? And so, our party was formed, and we proceeded to board my mom's car, since she was kind enough to let me use it, which she did most of the time. I was in the driver's seat, next to Ozzy Beard, while the leg beard and the neck beard shared the back seat. I turned on the engine and put on some music to unburden my head. As I drive to the traffic-infested streets of my town, Schopenbeard engaged on a euphoric outburst.
You know, I just do not understand why people go to church and believe in God. Don't they see it's stupid? God is not real. Even if he was, he's a heartless bastard for letting that much evil into this world. That is why I agree with Schopenhauer.
Shocking, right?
Life is suffering, and the only thing we can do is accept it and avoid increasing and spreading the suffering.
Although that somewhat Buddhist take on Schopenhauer is convincing, I'm a good old unorthodox Catholic Taoist. At the time, sprinkled with a bit of New Age. I since abandoned the New Age ideas, but still, I wasn't in the mood for a theological debate. So I chose to remain silent, with my eyes on the horrible traffic. Ozzy Beard and Betty, they were in the mood though. Ozzy Beard took the lead, and he replied to the euphoric tirade.
Yeah. Besides, they murdered many peoples in the name of their god, while priests abuse little boys, and they tell us that we Satanists are the evil ones?
When he says Satanist, of course he meant an atheistic edgelord. Betty Beard interjected, and she said,
"The Spanish Inquisition was the best example of that, not to mention the genocide of indigenous peoples."
If I were in a chatty mood, I probably would have interjected my own ideas. But I wasn't in the mood, so I remained silent. Schopenbeard, in his usual misogynistic manner, outright ignored Betty Beard, and he replied to Ozzy Beard.
I know. Imagine going to church as a kid. That's a sure way to be impaled.
He unleashed his Sendashi Shuriku that hit me for 1d6 sonic damage. After some time of euphoric statements, the sky began to darken, and I looked at the time, 6:56 p.m. Oh, thanks a lot, traffic. Port Andrews closes at 7, and we're nowhere even close to it. So I interrupt the euphoria flying wildly in the car.
Ozzy Beard, Port Andrews is almost closed and we have to buy our products some other day. Maybe next week.
He agreed, so I continued.
Well, it looks like our plans have changed. Can you give us the directions to where you're staying, Betty Beard?
She nodded happily and she said,
"Sure thing. Just keep straight, then go left, then straight again, and I'll show you where to enter. If you need references, it's very close to the Motel Lumar.
You see, where I live, motels are very different to the American version. To put it plainly, it's where you go to have sex. Most of the time with ladies of the night, if you catch my drift. Great. I'm sure she wasn't implying anything to me. I followed her directions, and we arrived at a tall building. It looked like it was built not too long ago, and we entered the parking lot. Betty Beard cheerfully said,
Come on! You can wait for me in the living room. I'm sure my roommates won't mind.
Can't I just wait in the car? I thought to myself. After about a second, Schopenbeard's eyes lit up, and he acknowledged Betty Beard for the first time.
Are they females?
To which she innocently replied.
Yes, we're all uni students.
Schopenbeard licked his lips, and he rubbed his hands together, releasing a small chuckle, like a kid about to enter a candy store, and he immediately said,
Let's go, OP. It isn't polite to ignore a lady's request.
Ozzybeard and I shared an annoyed look, as we knew full well of his eccentricities. He is going in anyhow, so we followed so that we could maybe avoid a tragedy. We piled into a small elevator. Ozzybeard and Schopenbeard's sheer mass forced me to be uncomfortably close to Betty Beard, who looked very pleased. Thank God, it wasn't long before we arrived at the 15th floor. We marched through a small hallway, and as we approached, Schopenbeard whispered to me,
Do you think they're hot? I'm starving for some prime cattle.
I didn't answer, as Betty Beard said at that moment.
Here it is. Let's go in.
And we did. It was a small apartment. It had 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a living room. To Schopenbeard's delight, there were 4 females staying with Betty Beard. Most of them were very normal, except for one who was reasonably attractive. Our beard friend almost couldn't contain his glee and his lust. He unleashed the Yoshifaku for all of them. They were very clearly uncomfortable, and they avoided interacting with us. We sat on the couch while Betty Beard grabbed her gear. Schopenbeard again whispered to me,
They endure for a clutching, OP, don't you think?
Now, I must explain why this statement is very demeaning, since I translated it literally, as I could not find an equivalent in English. The overall statement means that they are f***able for just pumping and dumping. The endure part was almost cringeworthy, but the verb clutching was the most vulgar part. For those of you who don't drive, the clutch is the pedal that you push to change gears in a car. As you see, it implies that they were merely vehicles or tools to satisfy his lust. Anyway, he didn't perform his famous Sendashi Shraiku, so I knew he was serious. Luckily for me, Betty Beard was packed and ready to go, so we exited the apartment and we boarded the car. The trip to Ozzybeard's house was long and already had cringe pains, so I don't recall any of what was said. I only remembered that Schopenbeard didn't want to go to Ozzybeard's place, and so asked if I can take him close to his house. I gladly did. One less beard to suffer, and it was on the way to our destination. After dropping the beard, we continued to Ozzybeard's place, where the legbeard stalker sexually harassed me. But again, that story is for another saga, just for her, in which Schopenbeard also plays a small role. After the double beard encounter, my interactions with Schopenbeard dropped dramatically, since we stopped sharing classes, and he spent most of his time with his neckbeard coven. Thank God. I want to give a special thanks to all involved, especially the writer, Elron the Dark One. You can follow him on Reddit in the link below. Also, Shane Cochran for the voice of OP and the Beard, Dan, he voiced the Sorcerer, Amber Lee, who voiced Betty Beard, and my wife, who did both Miss LaCane, Miss Joplin, the Bar Wench, and also the Nun. Thank you guys very much. Also want to give a special thanks to my patrons. Your support is greatly appreciated. Hope you guys enjoyed this compilation. And with that, you all have a good day. And until next time, this is Dallas signing off.